You know how when you're first learning to swim, um, the absolute hardest part isn't actually mastering the flutter kick or like timing your breathing?
Right, yeah, or figuring out how to paddle.
Exactly. The hardest part is that terrifying moment when the instructor tells you to just lean back, stop moving entirely, and let the water hold you.
Oh, the dead man's float. Yeah, I mean, it goes against literally every primal instinct in your body.
Really does.
When you lean back, you feel incredibly heavy, you feel completely out of control, and your brain is absolutely certain that you're going to sink straight to the bottom of the pool.
Your internal alarm system is just blaring, right?
Oh, good.
It's telling you that your survival depends entirely on your own furious, constant movement. The logic is so simple: if you stop kicking, you drown.
But the profound irony of that instinct, though, is that the frantic thrashing is exactly what tires you out and pulls you under.
Yeah, you exhaust yourself.
Right, because the buoyancy of the water is a fixed physical property. It's
Wow.
there, it's doing its job, supporting your weight, whether you choose to trust it or not. The water doesn't actually require your effort to be buoyant.
It's wild how that physical tension, like our exhausting need to control everything versus the reality of what's actually holding us up, it maps so perfectly onto how we handle modern stress.
It really is a perfect parallel.
And that tension is exactly what we're getting into in today's deep dive. We are looking at a deeply practical survival guide for anyone who feels like they are constantly thrashing just to keep their head above water.
And we have some incredible source material for this today.
We do. Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a sermon titled Unbreakable. It's part 4 of the From Captivity to Conquerors series, and it was delivered by Reverend Dr. Angela B. Martin at the English Christian Church of Querétaro, Mexico.
Yes, and she unpacks this ancient text, Romans chapter 8, verses 26 through 39 in the New Living Translation, and she just applies it so directly to our daily anxiety.
It's amazing how a 2,000-year-old text becomes incredibly urgent when you filter it through this modern lens. Because she's not treating this as abstract theology to debate, right?
Not at all. It's a framework for handling guilt, navigating chaos, and really just surviving a world that constantly demands our frantic kicking.
So to understand how we process our stress, Reverend Martin argues we first have to recognize our fundamental misconception of control. And she sets the scene with this brilliant story from a family vacation back in 2008.
Yeah, this story is so good. So picture a serene, sunlit ocean beach in the Bahamas. Her kids, Ben and Gabby, are very little, and this is their very first time seeing the actual ocean.
Right.
Gabby is about 2 years old, and she's wearing one of those tiny bathing suits with the inflatable life vest built right into the fabric.
So she is fully equipped for safety.
Completely. And her dad, Lamar, takes her out into the water to put her on one of those floating water loungers.
But keep in mind the scale of the danger here, because the water is incredibly shallow. I mean, it only comes up to Lamar's kneecaps.
Right, he's barely wading.
Exactly. So he places little 2-year-old Gabby on this floater, and she just absolutely loses her mind. She screams like she is trapped on the deck of the sinking Titanic.
Just utter panic.
Her eyes are squeezed completely shut in sheer terror, and her little arms and legs are just flailing wildly.
In her mind, she is stranded in the middle of the deep blue sea, surrounded by hungry sharks, fighting for her life. She's missing the beautiful sunset. She's missing the laughter of her family playing nearby.
Because she's entirely consumed by the panic of her perceived situation.
Exactly. But the crucial twist to the story is what Gabby cannot see because she refuses to open her eyes. Her dad is standing right next to her. His loving gaze hasn't left her for a single second.
And most importantly, his hands are physically resting on the floater the entire time.
Yeah.
I mean, she couldn't fall into the water if she actively tried.
Reverend Martin uses this image to highlight this profound psychological and theological reality. So many of us spend our entire spiritual lives agonizing over our grip on God.
We lie awake asking, am I holding on tight enough? Am I praying the right way? Is my belief strong enough to keep me afloat?
Right. We live in this constant state of spiritual flailing, terrified that if our personal grip slips, we are going under.
It makes me think of riding a massive, terrifying roller coaster. You're rocketing down a drop, and you're just white-knuckling that safety harness over your shoulders until your hands literally cramp up.
Oh, absolutely.
You're putting all your muscular endurance into holding that bar down, and you completely forget that the bar is mechanically locked into the chassis of the train. The safety isn't coming from your exhausted grip, it's coming from the mechanism that is holding you.
That analogy captures the illusion perfectly. The locking mechanism doesn't rely on your strength at all. And the text Reverend Martin is unpacking argues that we are not held up by our grip on the divine. We are held by the divine's grip on us.
Even when we let go.
Even when we let go, even when our arms are flailing in a panic, that grip remains secure.
Which is incredibly comforting to realize. But it immediately brings up a very raw human dilemma. Because if we can't white-knuckle the bar, what happens when the roller coaster of life leaves us so battered and sick and exhausted that we can't even articulate a call for help?
Yeah, what happens when we don't even have the energy to reach for the bar in the first place?
Exactly.
But Reverend Martin addresses this exhaustion head-on through Romans 8, verses 26 and 27. The text states that the Holy Spirit helps us in our weakness, praying for us with, quote, groanings that cannot be expressed in words.
And she grounds this with a really heavy story, right?
She does. It's a very real story about a pastor friend from her seminary days. This is a man who dedicated his entire life to his faith, but recently his life completely unraveled.
Right. He lost his health in this devastating sequence. He suffered through 4 strokes, a bout of shingles, COVID, and pneumonia.
Just wave after wave.
And then, just 2 months before Reverend Martin delivered the sermon, he lost everything he owned in a house fire.
It is a staggering compound of grief and trauma. And she is remarkably candid about where her friend is at, mentally and spiritually. She admits that right now this pastor is simply too angry, too broken, and too worn out to pray.
He physically and emotionally cannot find the words to string a sentence together.
Right. He knows he, quote-unquote, should, but he just can't.
I hear that.
Yeah,
But, you know, we are constantly messaged, especially in modern hustle culture, and honestly, in a lot of religious circles, that we have to present a polished version of ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Everything has to be curated.
Right. You don't pitch a client without a flawless deck. You don't post a photo without a filter. And you certainly don't approach the divine without a perfectly constructed, eloquent prayer. Doesn't this ancient text completely upend that expectation?
It's a total paradigm shift. She points out that when her friend has absolutely no words, the Spirit takes up his groaning and carries it up to heaven for him. Even in his total silence, he isn't praying alone. And the daily application she draws from this is just incredibly liberating. You do not have to wait until you are holy enough or put together enough to pray.
So like a heavy sigh at 3 a.m. while you're staring at the bedroom ceiling, or a frustrated, wordless groan in the bathroom stall at work between awful meetings, those actually count as prayer.
They do. The Spirit takes the raw, unfiltered material of your exhaustion and finishes what you cannot articulate. You don't have to translate your pain into polite theology.
But if the Spirit is willing to meet us in that rock-bottom exhaustion, we inevitably arrive at the million-dollar question, right?
Which is...
why is the pain there in the first place? If we are securely held, how does Reverend Martin handle the classic dilemma of awful things happening to good people?
What's fascinating here is how carefully she navigates Romans 8.28, which is that famous verse that says, God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love him.
Right.
She says she has to handle this verse with clean hands because she is acutely aware of how frequently this specific text has been weaponized to hurting people.
She is tackling the toxic positivity angle.
Yes.
Like the everything happens for a reason platitude that people offer at funerals, just because they don't know what else to say.
Precisely. She explicitly deconstructs that cliche. He clarifies what the text does not say. It does not say that tragedy is secretly good.
Right.
She states emphatically that her friend's house burning down was not good. Cancer is not good. God is not the author of your pain. And he doesn't look at a tragedy and magically label it a good thing.
Instead, she focuses on the phrase, work together.
Yes.
God will work everything together for good, meaning he refuses to waste the pain. And to explain this, she uses this brilliant analogy of a master baker in a kitchen.
It's a great image.
Right. Because you look at a pantry, you see raw, isolated ingredients,
Right.
raw flour, baking powder. If you've ever been a curious kid and tried to eat a spoonful of raw baking powder, you know the taste is incredibly bitter and chalky. It's awful.
It's completely unpalatable on its own. You would never just eat it. But a master baker takes those bitter, isolated ingredients and works them together. The heat of the oven, the mixing, the careful combination of elements creates a cake.
And the final product is something beautiful and sweet that you could never possibly taste if you only sampled the individual ingredients.
Exactly. And she connects this baking process to 4 unbreakable links in verses 29 and 34 new, called justified and glorified.
But those are pretty heavy theological terms. How do they actually function as an unbreakable chain for us?
Well, let's break them down sequentially. Foreknew means that before you ever made a mistake, before the chaos ever hit, you were already known and chosen.
Okay.
Then called is the active invitation into a purpose larger than your current circumstances. Justified means your record is entirely cleared, you were declared not guilty.
Right.
And finally, glorified is the finished product, the fully baked cake where the pain has been entirely redeemed. Reverend Martin describes the sequence as God swapping out an old, heavy chain of death that was dragging us underwater for a brand new chain forged in grace that actually holds us up.
Let's hover on that third link for a second, being justified.
Okay.
Because if God is constantly working to redeem our pain and has justified us, meaning he's cleared our names, why do we spend so much of our daily mental energy condemning ourselves?
It's a deeply ingrained habit, isn't it? Reverend Martin points to verses 31 through 34, where Paul basically stands up in a metaphorical courtroom and shouts, "Who dares accuse us?"
Love that imagery.
The setup is that God is the judge who has already handed down a verdict clearing us, and Jesus is the defense attorney sitting at the right hand of the judge, actively pleading our case.
But the everyday reality is that we just ignore that verdict completely. We run a private, relentless courtroom in our own heads all day long.
We do. We constantly relitigate our minor failures.
We beat ourselves up for fumbling an important email, for snapping at the kids in the rush before school, for saying something unnecessarily sharp to a partner. We act as our own prosecutor, bringing up charges that the judge has already thrown out.
Right. But I hear that, but I have to stop you there for a second. Because my immediate reaction to case dismissed is that it sounds kind of like a free pass. If I snap at my kids or blow off a deadline and I just tell myself case dismissed, aren't I just avoiding accountability?
That's a really fair pushback.
Doesn't a little bit of guilt motivate us to be better people?
It's a crucial distinction to make. And this raises the difference between healthy conviction and toxic condemnation.
Okay, unpack that.
Conviction is specific. It points at a specific error, like snapping at your kids so you can apologize, correct the behavior, and repair the relationship.
Right.
Condemnation, on the other hand, which is what Paul says we are free from, is an attack on your identity. Condemnation tells you that because you snapped at your kids, you are fundamentally a bad parent, broken and unworthy of love.
Ah, I see. So condemnation breeds shame, and shame just makes us hide.
Exactly. When you are paralyzed in a cycle of shame, you tend to lash out or repeat the negative behavior. Reverend Martin argues that living uncondemned actually frees a person to make better, grace-filled choices.
That makes a lot of sense.
Freedom from condemnation breeds real accountability because it removes the shame that prevents us from admitting we were wrong in the first place.
So her practical advice here is an active mental intervention. When you catch yourself relitigating that fumbled email for what she calls the 5011th time,
I love that phrase.
you have to actively interrupt the thought. You have to say out loud to yourself, case dismissed. You have to stop serving a prison sentence that your defense attorney already served for you.
It requires breaking a deeply entrenched mental habit, for sure. But dismissing self-condemnation only wins the internal battle. We still have to step outside our heads, where the world is waiting to throw its daily chaos at us.
So that handles the internal trial, but what about the external chaos? What does this all mean for a typical Tuesday morning commute?
This brings us to the climax of the sermon's practical application in verses 35 through 39. Paul asks a massive, sweeping question. Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does trouble, calamity, or persecution mean we are cut off?
And he answers it with a resounding no, right? Claiming we have overwhelming victory.
Yes, and Rev Martin gets a little church nerdy here, diving into the original Greek, which is just fascinating. She unpacks the word Paul used, hypernikmen.
Hypernikmen. Hyper meaning over the top, beyond the standard, excessive, and nikmen meaning to conquer or win.
We aren't just surviving, we are hyper-conquerors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. She explains that being a hyper-conqueror doesn't just mean you barely limp away from the battle. It means the very weapon the enemy forged to destroy you gets turned into your anchor. But she brings this down from these dramatic biblical heights of famine and swords. Because, unless you're living in a historical epic, most of us aren't facing a literal sword this week.
But thankfully.
Right. She applies this ancient warfare theology to what she calls a regular smegular Tuesday.
Paul is establishing the absolute extremes to make a point, right? Famine, nakedness, the sword. The logic is an if-then argument from the greater to the lesser.
It's
The same magnitude of love required to hold someone secure through historical persecution is the exact same love holding you through a grinding, miserable Tuesday. If a literal sword cannot separate you from this love, then logically, the spilled coffee on your way out the door cannot either.
That reframes the mundane completely. We're talking about sitting in dead-stop traffic, receiving a passive-aggressive text from your mother-in-law, opening a surprise car repair bill that just blows up your monthly budget.
Or dealing with that one highly irritating coworker.
Yes, the overwhelming victory applies to all of it.
And the active move here is to repurpose those irritations. You turn the weapon into an anchor by using the irritant as a prompt to reconnect with the grip that holds you.
Instead of letting a red traffic light ruin your mood and spike your blood pressure, it becomes a forced pause for a 5-second prayer. Abba, still here.
I love that.
An overdraft alert on your bank account isn't a cue to spiral into panic. It's a tangible cue to consciously hand over your financial worry.
A tense family text becomes a moment to pause, take a breath, and extend grace rather than reacting defensively just to ensure you have the last word. You are so secure in your belonging that you can afford to let the petty stuff slide.
It fundamentally alters your posture toward the world. And Paul finishes this chapter by essentially ransacking the entire universe looking for something, anything, that can break this bond.
He checks death, he checks life, angels, demons, our anxieties about today, our dread about tomorrow.
He looks at the highest heights and the deepest depths of creation, and he finds absolutely nothing. Unbreakable belonging.
It's a profound shift in Paul's own mindset, too. Reverend Martin points out that earlier in the book of Romans, back in chapter 7, Paul was writing from a place of deep isolation. It was all I, me, my.
He felt like a lonely captive, chained to a body of death, trying to white-knuckle his way to goodness.
But by the end of chapter 8, he is speaking as an unbreakable we. The lonely I dissolves into a collective, held community.
Reverend Martin has a great challenge for you this week. She suggests making your own personal list in Paul's cadence. When your anxiety flares up, you name your specific modern threats out loud.
You look at your life and say, neither this rejection letter, nor this waiting room, nor this overdraft fee will ever be able to separate me from the love of God.
It takes this sweeping ancient theology and plants it firmly in the reality of your specific Tuesday.
So to pull all of these threads together, we've gone on quite a journey today. We started with 2-year-old Gabby panicking on the floater, squeezing her eyes shut, entirely blind to the fact that she was already safely held by her father.
We looked at how our sheer exhaustion and wordless 3 a.m. groans are carried for us when we just can't speak.
We stepped into the master baker's kitchen to see how bitter, unpalatable ingredients are worked together into something beautiful, without minimizing the reality of the pain.
We walked into a sunlit courtroom to hear our internal prosecutor dismissed.
And finally, we learned how to be hyper-conquerors, turning the frustrating weapons of a chaotic Tuesday into anchors of peace.
The core message here is that you are not a captive to your circumstances, your guilt, or your anxiety. You are more than a conqueror, and your belonging is unbreakable.
Which leaves us with one final thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. If Paul is right, and there is literally nothing in the entire catalog of the universe, no power, no disaster, no petty annoyance that can separate us from this love.
Wait, what if our greatest daily obstacle isn't actually the external threats we face?
Exactly. What if the biggest threat to our peace is simply our own deeply ingrained habit of keeping our eyes squeezed shut? Think about it. What would your tomorrow look like if you woke up and assumed, before anything even happened, before your feet even hit the floor, that you were already being held?
Like learning to float in that swimming pool.
Yes. What would happen if you just stopped frantically kicking and finally trusted the water to hold your weight?
It changes everything.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Rev Martin's Unbreakable. We hope you carry this perspective and maybe a little less tension into your week. Take care, everyone.